The super rich soaked up billions in COVID cash. Conspiracy fact. The ties between big government, big pharma, and big banks led to the greatest transfer of wealth in modern history via pandemic regulations and stimulus. It's no longer a conspiracy theory that this has made the world's wealthiest wealthier. This video will reveal how it happened, and most importantly, who the good and bad billionaires around the world truly are. So let's take a look at how the super rich soaked up billions in COVID cash. Welcome back to Billionaire Crypto Investor. Like, subscribe, and quench your thirst for knowledge. COVID kills the poor while the wealthy profit. According to a research released by Oxfam International, the wealth of the top 10 richest men has risen throughout the coronavirus pandemic, fueling inequality that combines to the deaths of at least 21,300 people every day. Oxfam's Inequality Kills research warns that the current global situation of excessive inequality is a sort of economic violence against the world's poorest people and nations. The majority of ordinary people around the world suffer as a result of structural and systemic policy and political choices skewed in favor of the richest and most powerful, according to the research, which used the COVID-19 vaccination divide as an example. Millions of people might still be alive today if they hadn't had a vaccine, Oxfam stated. But they're dead, denied a chance while giant pharmaceutical corporations have monopoly control of these technology. According to the analysis, 252 males own more money than the total wealth of 1 billion women and girls throughout Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Furthermore, 10 of the world's wealthiest men own more than the world's poorest 3.1 billion people. While the wealthy become even wealthier as a result of the pandemic, the earnings of 99% of humanity plummeted. The Oxfam report is generally released before the World Economic Forum or WEF annual conference in Davos, Switzerland, but the gathering of the world's wealthiest and most powerful has been postponed yet again owing to the pandemic. The World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2022 warns that the imbalanced economic recovery from the coronavirus, which has relied heavily on vaccination rollouts, has exacerbated internal and international differences. It also underlined that rising inequality, exacerbated by the pandemic, will undoubtedly aggravate tensions and resentments, complicating governments' responses to climate change, economic inequities, and social instability. Billionaires doubled wealth. Billionaires such as Amazon's Jeff Bezos and Tesla's Elon Musk have seen their fortunes rise throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, while the world's poor have faced years of misery, according to Oxfam, which called for action to combat inequality. According to the Inequality Virus, a report released as world leaders check in for the World Economic Forum's virtual Davos dialogue, nations face a shrinking window of opportunity to establish a fair, green recovery. We are witnessing the largest growth in inequality since records began, Oxfam International Executive Director Gabriela Boucher said in a statement, calling for more wealth taxes and stronger worker rights. Rigged economies are funneling riches to a wealthy elite who are riding out the pandemic in style, while people on the front lines, shop assistants, hospital workers, and market vendors are fighting to make ends meet. COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on the poor and vulnerable, with women and marginalized workers suffering the brunt of unemployment losses, and the World Bank predicting that more than 100 million people will be forced into deep poverty. According to Oxfam, reducing the number of people living in poverty to pre-crisis levels could take more than a decade. Meanwhile, between March and December 2020, the combined fortune of the world's billionaires increased by $3.9 trillion to $11.95 trillion, according to the research. According to Oxfam, the 10 wealthiest men, led by Bezos and Musk, including LVMH luxury group CEO Bernard Arnault, Microsoft's Bill Gates, and Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, increased their net worth by $540 billion over the same period. According to academics, that amount would be enough to prevent anyone from slipping into poverty as a result of the epidemic and pay for a vaccination for everyone on the planet. The pandemic has revealed economic inequities and fostered momentum for transformative policies, according to Oxfam, which calls for higher taxes on wealth and companies as well as improved worker safeguards. A temporary tax on the surplus earnings of the 32 major firms who gained the most during the pandemic might have raised $104 billion in 2020. Many improvements will require international cooperation, according to Jayati Ghosh, an economics professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, who was one of the economists questioned by Oxfam for the research. Vaccine equity and super-rich taxation. According to Oxfam, persons in low and middle-income countries are around twice as likely to die from COVID-19 infection as people in high-income nations. Governments have the potential to shift course and reduce economic violence at its source by setting the groundwork for a more equal future. According to the research, imposing a one-time windfall tax on the COVID-19 gains of the 10 wealthiest men would produce $812 billion. The growing wealth disparity between the richest and poorest Americans has prompted some lawmakers to suggest a wealth tax that would target the country's billionaires. Despite the fact that 6 out of 10 Americans believe the wealthy do not pay enough taxes, the proposal has stalled. According to a recent assessment by a group led by economist Thomas Piketty, the world's 2,750 billionaires are now wealthier than half of humanity. Based from the analysis, the wealth disparity is roughly the same as it was more than a century ago, when the Gilded Age created vast gaps between affluent and poor. Despite the fact that the United States is a rich country overall, the poorest Americans have fallen behind their counterparts in other countries. According to Piketty's data, the poorest half of Americans have less wealth than the poorest half of Chinese citizens. Also, Oxfam suggested that the data should be used to support a wealth tax on billionaires, with a new tax income going towards children's health and education. Inequality is bad for everyone, quoting the report's foreword, which was authored by Disney heiress Abigail Disney, who has become a de facto advocate for more taxes on the wealthy and better salaries for workers. Disney said in the foreword that she believes inequality is rising as a result of years of weakening support for unions and regulatory measures that were supposed to safeguard average Americans. Since the 1980s, lawmakers have lowered taxes on the wealthiest Americans in the hopes of using the extra money to create jobs and economic opportunity. However, data shows that this hasn't happened, and the tax cuts have only benefited the wealthy. When we started this pandemic, society was afflicted with fissures, cracks that have expanded into fault lines, Disney wrote. There is more than enough money to fix most of the world's issues. It is simply held in the hands of millionaires and billionaires who refuse to pay their fair share. It is up to us to determine how we will exit this global crisis. It could be more of the same. Violent economies fueled by billionaire wealth, rising inequality, and self-defeating greed. Alternatively, if we demand it, fundamental transformation may occur. Economies based on equality in which no one lives in poverty, nor in incomprehensible billionaire wealth in which disparity no longer kills, in which hope reigns. It's all up to us. But if we allow governments to partner with corporations, humanity is at a huge loss. What are your thoughts on the imbalance of our world's poor, middle class, and elite? Comment down below. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and head to the Billionaire Crypto Investor Archive for more must-see videos.